Welcome to the Moulding Health Show. Our goal is to leverage the wisdom and experience of healthcare practitioners to set you on a path of self-discovery and healing. These insights, coupled with a multidisciplinary approach to each area of interest, should provide an invaluable resource to everyone looking for a better approach to health. In this episode, we speak to Stacey Fong about stress management from a counselling psychologist perspective. Stacey Fong, welcome to the show. So we're really glad to have you on board. And we're going to be talking about stress management just to complete, the recent topics we've been having around burnout and anxiety and all of those good topics. Welcome on board.
All right, and thank you so much, Oliver and Shaz, for having me on the show. And I really look forward to sharing some knowledge. And I think because stress is something we as human beings experience on a day-to-day basis, and particularly given the pandemic, it's going to be something that I hope will bring some more sort of knowledge and assist people, right, in living more stressful lives going forward.
Yeah, like nicely said. I like that intro. I always ask shares this because it's always amazing, with each one of the stories, with the guests that we've had on board. So shares, how did you convince Stacey to get on the show?
To be fair, it actually didn't take much convincing. I'd met Stacy earlier this year when she moved over onto our billing software and did some training sessions with her. And I was reaching out, and the original topic I proposed, Stacy said, it wasn't one that she was too proficient in, and actually sent me the details for a colleague of hers. And Stacy kind of just said, she's far more into the burnout, stress management, and that kind of thing. And looking at the topics that were coming up, I extended the invite to chat about stress management, seeing as though it was one of Stacy's points of interest.
That's amazing. Thanks, Stacey, for agreeing. Because it does, the recent shows we've had, was around burnout and, nutrition and stuff like that. And I thought, and mental wellness and, mental health. And I think, it's such a prevalent topic. So I'm so glad that you specialize in something like this. But maybe to kick it off, just tell us, how do you experience stress management with your clients currently? Do they present in a certain way? And maybe tell us what actually is, stress and stress management.
Okay, so to answer the first question in terms of stress management and the clients I'm seeing, typically, when clients walk in, they're quite self-aware, in terms of saying, I'm going through this and I'm not feeling okay. I'm snapping at my hubby, or, I'm getting a bit short-tempered with my kiddies, and I don't feel comfortable, right? And potentially then exploring around this idea of, could this be stress or something else? And if it is stress, how do we manage that together, right? And we work through this process together of managing stress. So I think maybe through our talk, we could then share different strategies or techniques that we potentially work through together. And then in terms of what stress is, I think it's really important to know that stress is our body's way of actually protecting us. So it's a very normal reaction to the daily demands of life, especially those that go beyond our ability to cope. And, I always think about it in an example of, we're on our way to a meeting, and we decide on this way to the meeting, we're going to pop over to the coffee shop, grab a quick coffee. And for some reason, the till is not working, and we're not able to pay for this coffee. And we know we need to get to this meeting, right? So that's when our body perceives our brain actually perceives some kind of threat to say, oh, we're going to be late for this meeting. It then signals to our body to say, okay, we're in threat. We need to actually release some hormones to increase our heart rate and even our blood pressure to give us that boost to cope with this situation, right? So we now have this fight or flight response, and it pushes us to make some kind of decision in that moment. So it might look like actually taking action and speaking to the manager at the store and saying, listen, I'm good for it. I'm going to pay today. I just need to get to my meeting. I'll be back. Or actually leaving some cash with the manager and saying, here we go. Please take this. I'm in a rush and I'm going to head to my meeting now. And luckily, we're on time for our meeting. So stressful situation managed, and we're able to move forward, right? So we're seeing that stress can actually be a good thing for us to actually deal with stressful situations, or even motivate us to achieve a goal we've set. So typically, stress is supposed to be temporary, and ideally, our bodies, after that stressful situation, then returns back to that restful state where the stressor has passed or we've managed that stressor effectively. But we're seeing in modern society now that there are a lot more daily hassles and demands placed on us as human beings, and our alarm systems just don't have that chance to switch off. And I think this is where it's really important for us to know what the causes and the potential signs are of stress.
I like how you said that, and I mean, there's a few things I just had to jot down, but I think fight or flight. I mean, big thing. I would like to maybe go into that a little bit in more detail, and I think I like what you said also about temporary, because yeah, I can't see that happening. As in, we live in a society where, and I'm not sure exactly where you are currently in the country, but in Johannesburg, they always say, it's almost like you can't be in Johannesburg without being stressed out. I mean, from the traffic to the schooling system to everything is just like a rush. It seems. So it's interesting, how you say that about the temporary. So I would love to, understand, maybe how do we make it temporary? Maybe that would be one thought, and definitely that fight or flight response. I mean, can you tell us, like, how would someone know that they're in that fight or flight response? Is there a way that they can almost tell that?
So I think once our body then releases those hormones like cortisol, we can start to feel our heart rate increase, right? And we're very quick to either like, oh, I need to run away, or I need to get defensive and fight off something. So we think about it typically in the sense of back in the day, when there's cavemen, we either need to fight off this, predator that's after us, or actually just run away and hide and seek shelter. So it typically comes from that kind of thinking, right? So when we think about it now in modern day life, stress becomes that predator that's not after us all the time, but sometimes, right? And we learn to deal with that, and then we carry on with life. So it is chemical responses within our brain, and then physically, you might feel your hands start to sweat. Sometimes the vision gets a bit blurry because you're having to think very quickly and you're just sort of psyched up to kind of run or do something. So, in terms of fight or flight, I would describe it as that quite simply. And then the second question, I'm kind of getting lost on, if you can just remind me what that was.
Just the more temporary part, so we talk about temporary, and it always seems that, and it's interesting to get your take on the whole, pandemic and COVID-19, because we've been going for close on 2 years now, just shy of that, and it's interesting to know whether people can actually make that temporary. I suppose, and I suppose, we might be crossing into maybe like post-traumatic stress disorder or something like that. But it's interesting to know whether, you see stress as temporary, with people, or is it almost like this new level of normal? So that would be my take on it. It's almost like, we have the stress, and, they always say like some stress is good stress, but is this temporary, like, in a true sense of like it's going to go down to zero or like 10 out of 100, or is it like the new normal of a 25 out of 100? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Sure, I think that's quite a tough one, given that, we're
Sorry.
all quite unique in how we deal with stress and manage stress. But, in light of the pandemic, and because, like you're saying, it's been going on for almost 2 years, I think a lot of us have reached this almost chronic stress where we're constantly stressed. And, to just sort of follow on what you were saying in terms of it's almost become the new normal to have this constant fight or flight happening with us. And in many instances, we get used to it, but it doesn't mean it's okay, right? To
Hmm.
be stressed, to feel like we are not able to deal with normal things in life, like getting the kids to bed on time or just standing in a long queue in the mall. Typically those things we're patient enough to deal, but we're finding with chronic stress, it's like we're getting annoyed, we're getting angry. And so I think in terms of that, yes, there is this chronic stress happening, but ideally we want it to be temporary. So within my practice, I try to work on how do we deal with a specific situation at this stage. And yes, we have this overarching pandemic happening, but the specific ones, like potentially we're struggling to pay our bills on time. How do we react to that situation where it's not so overwhelming, right? And we can then have a broader way of thinking on how to practically deal with, okay, what do I need to do to get my finances in order to pay that bill on time? And then create less stress for that. So it's even if we move from situation to situation as opposed to overall stressing about everything kind of vibe.
Stacey, I love the way that you put that, that it's like, look at each situation. How do you deal with the stress of that one once you've learned the coping mechanism to deal with this stressor, and then you move down the line? So it's like if you're laying bricks, you build a house one brick at a time, as if you don't put 400 bricks up at the same time. But even if somebody is learning to cope with those individual stresses, back to this whole idea of this chronic stress that people are having, are you starting to see within patients or in general, sort of almost physical or emotional signs that somebody is actually in a state of chronic stress?
So, I'm starting to see with some clients, there is this physical side of it where it's these constant tension headaches and sometimes even migraines. And there are complaints around these bodily aches and pains or even tummy cramps, right? So there are these sort of signs coming through. And even emotionally, they're saying, like I'm snapping at people that I typically wouldn't snap at them for, and finding things annoying. And just being a little more emotionally sensitive. So they're starting to cry for things that typically wouldn't make them cry, right? And they're getting a lot more irritable and moody. So these are the signs that are starting to indicate to us and that client, whoa, right? There's something I need to start doing to feel okay in this moment. And if we think of it cognitively as well, there's this decrease in ability to actually focus and concentrate at work, or even a task like cooking. We're starting to burn the rice or something, and simple things like forgetting where we put our car keys starts to become a reality. And so those are the kinds of things I'm starting to see with this chronic stress happening.
I like how you said that, because I think it's always, it's that last bit, it's that one event that almost like causes the rest to, unravel. And, like I've noticed this, like, for instance, like if you have like back issues, it's normally like just picking up, like the phone from the desk, like just, and then, it throws it out. And, from what you seem to be saying, it's like, it's almost like there, but it's just always that one event that kind of causes everything to bubble over. And that's why I'm quite excited about this topic, in terms of, maybe taking the veil off it, is because people don't really realize that they might be in that stressful scenario. It's just, we're just going through life, and, there's homework for kids, and there's like, work pressures, and there's being on Zoom for 8 hours a day and all of those kind of things, and then still doing the deadlines, and stuff like that. And it's interesting how people are almost coping. And I probably used this example, in another episode, but, I turned to my little boy, and we're driving to school, and I see him got his face shield on. And to this day, he's never asked me or said, I'm not going to put my face shield on. We've never had in-depth conversations about it, but it's just the new normal. Like I put my face shield on, and it almost seems the same with everyone. Everyone's just going through, and I don't think we've taken the pause to say, I wonder how long this is going to last for. I mean, is this the new normal? I think that goes back to my earlier question. Is that 25 out of 100 the new normal? And if that's the new normal, it's almost like we need to adapt to that new normal. Like, firstly, we need to be aware. We need to know that actually we are in a stressed, scenario. And I think that's the part that, people haven't maybe looked at or don't know of. And that's why I'm excited to do this show, is by speaking to people like yourself or practitioners like yourself. At least we as lay people know actually we're in a stressed out scenario. Maybe there's things that we must be doing, around this. So yeah, that, I think I like the, the emotional and the physical, how you said that, appears. But is there anything that people could do almost immediately? So let's say someone is saying, okay, today I feel really stressed out. I mean, do they put in for a day's worth of leave? What do they do?
Sure, that's interesting. And when I think about, the new talk around taking mental health breaks and mental health days in corporate, absolutely an advocate for it, right? Because if you're not able to be at your best, how are you actually going to contribute to that company in any way? So I do believe it's really important to be able to take a break, and hopefully having a line manager who is open enough to accepting that, well, okay, I understand, I hear you, you're not doing okay today. Take a break, go get a massage, go listen to chilled, de-stressing music, not just music that's going to arouse you, right? Or maybe just go take a walk in the park and feel okay, right? So I think it's really important to be able to pick out these things for yourself. And I mean, for some people, it does. It looks like journaling or going onto an app like Happy Me and doing the activities that are kind of part of that app, being creative for the day. Yay.
That sounds so cool. I mean, like, and I just hope, over time that it does get there. I haven't been in corporate for years now, and I hear horror stories still, about how intolerant, I mean, the environment could be, to people that are struggling. And I just wonder, if that is going to change. I hope it does. But I love, what you said. And I think sometimes we were having my wife's uncle is down from the USA, and I was having a chat with him, and we were just talking about how you almost like need to carve out the time for yourself, and you need to figure out what like makes you happy, and sometimes that's almost removing the toxic things that but by even saying that, you need to be so much more aware of it. And I think if we get to the first stage where people are seeking professionals like yourself and saying, I am struggling with this, or I am struggling with life, and what could I do, or am I on the right track, or is this normal? I think when we start opening up those conversations, then people probably know what they need to do. But in all of my corporate life, which was over 20 years, I've never heard anyone come to me as a team member or a colleague or anyone that said, I'm actually having a stressed out day. Please can I take some time off, to deal with it. I've never, it's just never happened. And that's what I'm saying, maybe it changes. But, in the environment that we are in, I've never seen it. Have you seen that with your clients? I mean, are they nurturing environments like that?
I think from my personal experience and my own experience in working for an institution, my line manager was very much like that. And because of that, we all felt safe enough and brave enough to disclose. And because she was very understanding, we were better off for it, and the team was better off for it. So, I think in my own personal experience that has happened, but in terms of clients, they haven't really come to say, I told my manager that I wasn't okay, and I'm having a stressed out day. So I think there is a lot of change that does need to happen. And, hopefully with the incorporation and a lot of employee wellness programs, we're going to start seeing that a lot more, and a lot of advocating that's happening on LinkedIn in terms of this mental health break and having a mental health day. I'm really hoping that this is going to have a drive forward. And, I just thought about your son, and I thought that is incredible, in terms of, he is living through this stressful situation, and yet he is so agile and adaptable and saying, okay, cool, I gotta wear this mask all day, every day, and it's okay. Right? So he's surpassed that stress of now learning that I need to wear the shield, to it's okay to wear the shield. So I think, we have a lot to learn from your son in terms of how we can actually deal with the daily stresses that we're actually dealing with.
Yeah. So just thinking about what you're saying now about Oliver's son, but it is true. If you look around at the moment, the kids seem to be handling the whole shift a lot better than a lot of adults are. The shift from working at the office to working at home, so going to school, schooling at home. So there's definitely something there that we could learn from the younger generation. But in regards to kind of the adult generation that is seemingly so chronically stressed and anxious and nervous and fidgety and all these things at the moment, what are some things that a person could do practically, almost on a daily basis, just to try and help them lower those stress levels, or actually just get out of the stress response from sitting in traffic for 3 hours today?
Okay, so there's quite a number of things that individuals can then start to learn to do. And in terms of stress reduction, I like to think of it as building stress resilience, right? So it's always quite important for the individual to figure out what works best for them, right? So it's like you're going for a run. You're not going to just put on any pair of tackies. You're going to put on the most comfortable pair of tackies and the one that works for you. And this is what we're going to do with finding a stress reduction technique that works for you. So examples can be things like, for some it is playing sport, right? For some it's doing yoga or meditating. For some individuals, it means going to a parlor and just getting their nails painted for that hour where they can sit and not think about anything and just focus on the layers being painted on, right? So we're taking ourselves mentally out of that stressful situation and being more present in the moment, in actually feeling and watching what is happening around us. So we then are moving into that space of practicing more mindfulness. And what that might look like within a therapy session is actually sitting together with a client and doing a breathing exercise together, or actually doing a progressive muscle relaxation technique together. And then encouraging them to, outside of the session, save a specific moment. So think about, you're busy brushing your teeth. Don't just brush them. Think about, okay, how am I holding my toothbrush? What does this toothpaste feel like on my tongue? What does it taste like? And it forces you to be in this moment, as opposed to constantly in our heads thinking about all of what could possibly go wrong and what is going wrong. But maybe sometimes also looking at what is going right for me right now, right? So practicing that gratitude as well. Like, yeah, I might be struggling with my bills, but I still have this awesome roof over my head where I get to sleep in a bed, or whatever it might be, right?
Hmm. I like that. I mean, I want to come back to the gratitude one because I think we could probably spend, some time, just talking through that. But you know what I like, and I've heard this a few times, but they always say you find activities where you're in that moment, and I want to ask, is there? I mean, like, so barring, what that is. I mean, that could be meditation or journaling or or sport or running. But is there something that it does to the mind? When you almost like just focused on that one activity, like what happens in that case? I mean, is it just that it takes out, I mean, is it just that it takes your mind off everything else? Is that what it is?
Okay. Sure. Yeah, I'm not really good with brain stuff, but from my understanding,
Mhm.
I think it would, right? Because if we think about this idea of multitasking, we're constantly cognitively switching, which I think can be quite strenuous, right? So we're going from one task to the next. But if we're then practicing, being in that moment and only focusing on that one thing, we're also giving our brain that time to kind of calm down as we focus on this moment. So I do think that it does have an effect on our brain, but it also has an effect on our body, right? So we're not in this hyper aroused state of constantly, oh my gosh, I gotta do this. Oh, I gotta get to doing that, right? It's okay, I'm brushing my teeth, and that's all I gotta do, right? And then after that, you can totally stress about it. Um, but it's even just those minutes, or those 5 minutes in a day where you're just, whew, okay, I'm calm, right? So I do believe that, doing things like this on a daily basis can really help us in de-stressing. And if I think about it generally, even if we start to incorporate living a healthier lifestyle, let me just say healthy, but just a more healthy lifestyle, and incorporating some healthier foods, and even maybe just some time to actually relax. So some clients have a worry slot in their day where they're like, this is 15 minutes where I'm going to stress about every little thing. And then after that 15 minutes, it's done. I'm going to really enjoy going to cook, or I'm just going to go play a game with my child and do their homework with them and enjoy that. And that's it.
I
So,
don't know about
yeah.
that last part. I've never done any homework with our little ones where that wasn't stressful, but that's just me. But I like your examples of just being in that moment, and that's the reason I asked that question. Is I don't think I've heard someone say that. Even brushing your teeth, if you're mindful of it, and you're just almost going through that motion and just concentrating on that. That's what I want to get out, is because it doesn't have, I think, especially, I don't know, but I don't know if it's just me, but, especially when you have children and stuff, I mean, it almost seems like there's not enough time to do everything. So, although, and it sounds ridiculous because, it's half an hour of exercise, like it shouldn't be that difficult to carve out a half an hour. But sometimes it does, and what I like about what you're saying is almost like you can use the everyday activities to just be a little bit more mindful. And I think if you can, then you're probably switching off that, that fight or flight response. So I really like that. And it'll be interesting to see, anyone listening, or like even myself, to see how you could use like the normal activities just to be a little bit more mindful. I know when I was doing consulting, because we were always on a client site, the last contract I did, and just the morning routine for me was like, I just took a little bit more time, setting up the laptop, even before getting into the kitchen to go get coffee. And I found that just almost like, it almost like zoned me down, for that day before, before you even open Outlook, to check your emails. And I found, it was something so small, but when you were saying the thing about the toothbrush, it reminded me of that. And I think, if that's what you meant, yeah, I definitely resonate with that, because I think just using the small little activities to be able to give you that space and maybe break from that, that fight or flight kind of response. So I like that. And in terms of your clients, how would you typically help them? So, I mean, I'm assuming someone comes through, so, and I say, oh, for instance, that's me, and I come through and I say, I'm really struggling with stress at the moment, all of the deadlines seem off the chart, the expectations are really high. And I'm just constantly in this, this state that of like stress. How would you typically help those type of clients?
Okay, so just to rewind a little, that was really great that you found your own coping strategy. You designed your own, right? Didn't have to go to, find an app or read up about it. You created your own, and that's exactly what it's about. And so typically part of this process is encouraging clients to do what's working, especially those healthier coping strategies. So the first step of it would be then to actually develop that self-awareness and becoming aware of those signs, right? The emotional, mental, and physical signs that are your warning signals. And then actually beginning to notice. So more of that cognitive behavioral type of perspective is then noticing what's happening in your body when you're stressed, Are my shoulders tensing? Is my jaw just so sore from clenching and I just haven't noticed it, right? And then also observing the thoughts in relation to this specific stressful event. So these deadlines are off the chart. What are your thoughts around it? Is it related to, I'm not going to actually be able to perform, and this is an reflection of the kind of person I am, like I can't keep up with deadlines, right? That kind of thing. So we're looking at those thoughts. Are those thoughts actually true? Are those judgments going to be made of you? And possibly looking at alternative thoughts that are more aligned with you getting those deadlines met. We then explore how you feel in relation to that event. So, is it bringing up feelings of sadness or fear, irritability, anger, and how we then use maybe those emotions to motivate us to move forward, or maybe looking at emotions that might actually facilitate this process better. And so when we look at that, we sit together and we really talk about things, and then we have these conversations around, let's rediscover the healthy strategies that you have already been using, and let's keep doing those, and let's see if we can incorporate new ones. So this is fantastic. You've learned this thing before putting on Outlook and checking your emails. Let's do more of that every day, right? And then we then would sometimes in a session then actually do other techniques if need be. And sometimes it actually looks like literally sitting down and painting together, or whatever it is for that client. And that's kind of what the process typically looks like in a nutshell.
You mentioned in there, obviously, there's a few cognitive things. So, when you're mentioning other techniques, would techniques like cognitive behavioral therapy or brain working recursive therapy and those kind of things then also come into play to teach the person how to almost harness that healthy coping mechanism and get rid of Oliver's got the wonderful one of he quietly puts his laptop down, takes a little bit more time in the morning before he opens it and looks at his email. Mine is come in, put the laptop down, go outside, have a smoke, make coffee, and then look at my email. So, but yeah, some of those other techniques, do they come in when you're treating somebody for chronic stress or just basic stress management?
And I do believe CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy can work, and it's typically something that I would use in terms of then the body, the thoughts, the emotions, right? And those core beliefs around what it means to not meet my deadline. So CBT does work, but I also work from a solution focused perspective. So it's looking at this idea of what are the best hopes for your future? What does a future look like for you that is less stressed? Because essentially, when that client is able to see that vision, they are able to implement small things in their lives that start changing that. So they might be able to say, cool, I'm going to make my coffee this morning and I'm going to do it and enjoy that and really feel this puff of cigarettes, going through my body. And that's part of it, right? Is seeing those things. So yeah, I think they definitely do work. BWRT can work as well. So I think it's also just the way the practitioner actually then implements it in relation to that event. And also, it's what works for the client. If you're not a good fit in terms of maybe this method that I'm using, you might want to then think about seeing a different therapist who's going to be a better fit for you, as opposed to wasting time and sometimes money, right? In seeing this person that is where it's not working.
I like that. You mentioned something, and we went through it very quickly, but where you said, around the deadlines, is this about me, or is it just, what I'm almost like sensing is going to happen if I don't meet these deadlines? And it's one of those things, we always joke about it, but, probably human beings are the only species that can stress themselves out by something that didn't even happen as yet. Do you find that that's the biggest, cause of stress? Is like we worry about things that didn't even happen. I mean, like I think once the mouse, like if I use this as an example, once the mouse falls, then we deal with it. But I find, like we almost like put these almost plans in place, or these thoughts, and it didn't even happen as yet. So it's almost like we stress ourselves out for even before we should be stressed. Is that what you find as well?
I think it's a balance, so sometimes there is this overthinking around the future, but typically what I'm seeing now is there's a very real stressor that's happening right now, so I've just lost my job. What do I do? Okay. So there are these very real, tangible stresses that are happening that we deal with, and then every so often it's okay, but what happens if I get a job and I don't like it? Well, we won't know until we get there, right? And that's where we'll start maybe having conversations around, okay, maybe we're stressing about this, and yes, it's a concern and it's realistic, but what can we do to actually enjoy aspects of that job? Or going forward, do we need to look at maybe improving your LinkedIn profile, or retaking a look at your CV and maybe upskilling in something? Yeah.
I like that. And I promise we're going to, I promised earlier that we're going to go back to that gratitude thing. And for me, what it's about is, I mean, there's so many things that we could be negative about, but there's so many things that we can be positive about. And, by the law of averages, I would like to go through that thought pattern in terms of understanding why is gratitude, so important. We had a client, and she mentioned. I still remember the blog post, Shaz. Where she mentioned she teaches her children about kindness, and she had this kindness jar, and so they would almost like put things into the kindness jar, and there was something about seeing that jar fill up, and I thought that's an amazing idea. So I'd like to like ask or get your thoughts on what does gratitude do for us, because I mean, if we knew what it did for us, maybe we should be spending more time on that, reflecting on what we do have, which is maybe a house, maybe home, maybe a job, those kind of things. Even if you lost your job, the fact that you don't have COVID, and you're lying in a hospital, that's probably a thing that you should be grateful for.
So I think about gratitude, I typically move to this idea of positive psychology and it being a technique within that modality or that theory. Um, and when I think about this idea of gratitude, it's also that idea of what is going right in my life? What are the strengths that I have and my family has that's going to get us through this challenging moment in our lives, right? Because the challenging moment is not going to happen forever, we hope, but it typically doesn't. And how can we use those strengths to actually then facilitate going forward? So when we're practicing gratitude, it tends to cognitively open up, broaden our thinking so that we can see that there are different opportunities, there are different ways that we can go about the situation. Because when we're stressed, we tend to start seeing things very narrowly. This is the only way it's going to happen, otherwise, it's not happening at all. So, gratitude really, I think, helps us to open up our mind to seeing different possibilities and opportunities going forward. And I know for myself personally, my partner and I practice this is every morning would say, I'm so grateful that we got a new kettle because our water's hotter than usual and we can make this awesome cup of coffee. And the fact that we can afford to buy coffee is so cool, right? So we do have this practice where we actually talk about it each morning because sometimes we tend to take for granted that we actually have toothpaste or we have running water, and just talking about those things for us really excites us, and saying, oh, cool, now we're going to have a good day because we walked out the house feeling grateful for what we have. Yeah.
Stacey, you said something very, very important there, and I think that for me is the biggest takeaway is just using the things that you're grateful for can actually be your strengths. And more importantly, that even if there's a stressor now, that stresses now, it's not going to be there forever. So my mom has this saying of everything happens in the perfect time frame sequence. If it was supposed to happen, it happens. And for a long time, I kind of like, okay, yeah, but there's some things that you can't tell me it was supposed to happen. And then, starting that, okay, as bad as something is, if you can find one thing a day, just take one thing and go, what went well? You do start to find that you're not as wound up about everything else because you kind of almost built that into your daily life. But doesn't that then fall along this whole line of, affirmations and those kind of things? I mean, there's so much talk about whether they do or don't work. What is your opinion on would affirmations or that, finding one thing a day that you're grateful for, does that also kind of start to help reduce stress in somebody who is on the verge of burnout?
I think it can. But if someone is on the verge of burnout that's already quite serious. There's obviously been a prolonged sort of history of this chronic stress that's happened, right? And so if we're already at that stage, sometimes that could help us to kind of get through that day or even just dragging ourselves out of bed to get to work. But I don't know if it would be enough if we're on the verge of burnout. But, if we are having a stressful situation, potentially that can help. And I think there is a fine line between, this toxic positivity and then also being very real in terms of what is happening for us in that moment, right? And so I know with some younger clients, it really helps them to have this gratitude journal where there's just one thing that and there's one question a day, and that question might be, what did you achieve today? And for some of them, it says, the fact that I woke up was great. I achieved that, right? And then they leave it at that. And the next day, it's like, what did you see today that made you smile? So it's even just looking at simple things like that that also can bring that or reduce stress, right? But we also have to look at what level on the spectrum our stress is. So chronic stress, we might need a little more of a sort of intensive intervention. Sometimes it might include in some cases with burnout, it might include actually taking some kind of supplement or in some cases medication where you're working with a GP or a psychiatrist and assisting that individual. Yeah.
Hmm.
But I really
And
like the idea of one grateful thing a day.
I like that too. I mean, but I suppose it depends on each person, whether it's actually working or not. And I think what I was, getting through with the earlier point was like, I think if you have more things to be grateful for, I think there's a sense of like maybe happiness with that. I think, you've almost like forced to be happy. It's like, so I don't know if this is 100% true or not, but they say, if someone compliments you, it's almost impossible for you to insult them back. It's like, it's like physically, you just can't do it. It's almost like, so if you have more things to be happy about, it's like you can't be unhappy, with something, and especially if it's not that big, if it's you just lost your job, I think it's going to be pretty rough anyway. But I know she has just hit that burnout topic quite quickly, but we didn't kind of ease into that. Is there a certain point that you go from, I'm a little bit stressed out, I'm chronically stressed out, and then I'm burnt out? Is there like a logical sequence to that, or how do you know you burnt out as opposed to stressed out, or is there a difference?
Yeah, there is a difference. And I think, sure, in terms of stress, typically the person is able to see sort of the light at the end of the tunnel. Okay, it's temporary. I can implement these things and life is going to be a little bit easier or things will go better if I can manage this one and I will manage it kind of thing. Whereas burnout is almost very like, okay, very closed off and we don't see that. It's too difficult. So we've reached that point of emotional and physical exhaustion where we cannot even drag ourselves out of bed. And if we do, it's an absolute chore, right? So when we think of those pillars of burnout in terms of this continual experience of life hassles and demands, and then this mismatch between unrealistic expectations and the reality of an actual situation. And when I think about burnout, I think about it more in the context of work-related stress, because it tends to happen a lot more in the work setting. And just some symptoms in terms of, we're beginning to start taking a more cynical outlook on life. We're a lot more critical on ourselves and our colleagues around us or just other people, right? And there's just no gumption to actually do the duties and the tasks required of us as part of work. So we're finding this lack of meaning and purpose to this actual task we're doing. I don't know why I'm doing this. It's typically kind of what's happening. And so when we think about stress, yes, there is this tiredness and this fatigue that happens. But in burnout, it goes far beyond that fatigue and tiredness. It's that extreme exhaustion then. So no matter what kind of relaxation activities or how much sleep you get, you might still feel that exhaustion, right? So you do need a more intensive kind of intervention to kind of work through burnout. Otherwise, it does lead to very serious health ailments, right? And I think I had listened to Cassie Foreman's show earlier, and it was really amazing. And I think it's a great talk to get more insight on this topic in terms of maybe using cognitive behavioral therapy in working through burnout sometimes. Yeah.
That's yeah. I mean, we really like that episode as well. I think Cassie definitely helped us a lot to understand burnout, and also fight or flight. We spoke about that there as well. So in Winnie the Pooh, the characters there, and so normally in corporate we would almost like okay, this is probably not right, but you profile people, like in the room, and you always relate it back to those characters. So would you say that EO was in a constant state of burnout? Because he
Ooh,
was
that's a
always,
tough
the
one.
one, he was the one that was always gloomy, and doesn't matter what he did during the day, he was always the one that, like took the, took the worst scenario. He was never the one that was optimistic or stuff like that. So I mean, I'm just joking about that, but there are people that, from a personality point of view, that are always just gloomy, and I wonder, if that's that they that they always stressed out, or is it just something about them that are like that?
Sure. This is a tough one. Um, there
Sorry,
is actually
and
a
for a
book.
Friday afternoon as well. I'll be like, we have to do that.
So there is actually a book on Winnie the Pooh in terms of potentially which characters had which diagnoses. Um, and from what I remember, I read it so many years ago, is we looked at Eeyore was the donkey, right? As possibly having major depressive disorder, right? Because it's always
Hmm.
this downcast, gloomy
Mm.
view of life. And so if I think about it in the work context, potentially he may have had burnout, right? There's no exhaustion to even fight for or advocate for yourself or anyone else, right? And Eeyore was a lot like that in the books as well. So potentially in the context of work, maybe it is burnout, or it could be influenced by some kind of diagnosis of depression. So it's always important to be able to figure out, is there a diagnosis happening here, or is it just stress or just burnout that we're working with?
I love that. When we could do it like that, obviously that wasn't cool to do, but it would explain, how you approach certain meetings, or how you approach certain, people maybe. But yeah, so just thought that's quite interesting. I did want to ask, so we have obviously stress, maybe a little bit of stress, maybe chronic stress, and then we got burnout. Is there a certain point where it turns into depression, or is that a completely different topic? How does,
Mm.
like, at what point would someone know that? And again, I mean, this is not clinical advice. This is more just a thought, because everyone would be different. But I wonder, at what point would someone say they're depressed as opposed to burnt out?
That's a tough one because the symptoms tend to overlap, and someone might be depressed and burnt out at the same time. One or the other could have actually been affecting either or. So, I think it's then important to kind of chat to your therapist or your GP in terms of the actual symptoms that you're going through. So maybe you're meeting the criteria in terms of depressive symptoms more so than we're meeting this criteria for burnout. So it's always important to be, quite objective, but also be able to understand that person's subjective experience of this and how it's impacting their life. So typically, if it's really starting to negatively impact multiple facets of life, we might be looking then at some kind of diagnosis. It could be depression, it could be anxiety. Um, so it's a tough one. I think it's just something you have to figure out with each person.
So on that one of depression, anxiety, burnout, they do at some point tend to cross paths. One could be the catalyst for the other. Do you find that people who suffer from depression or anxiety, or any of these obsessive compulsive disorders and that kind of stuff, do they tend to be more stressed than other people, or do you find that irrespective of whether you do have a mental illness or not, burnout and stress are still very real things for everybody?
Hmm. I think I would go with the latter point, Shaz, in terms of, despite mental illness or even physical illness, stress is something that we all experience as human beings, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't have our brains and our bodies having this alarm response that built into us, right? So I do believe, despite all of those things that might actually be experiences, or we might be living with something else like depression or anxiety, we still are, we most likely going to experience stress. Even if we're a healthy individual, we might just experience stress. Mm.
Yeah, and I think I mean, Shaz mentioned some even more hardcore stuff than depression, but obsessive compulsive and the rest of that. But I think the point around that though was, I think there are differences, and you kind of have to realize, probably where you are would help, like therapists like yourself, Stacy. So I think it's just important to know, at what scale you are at, and then probably seek the right advice. But I think it's just starting by looking or seeking out advice and knowing where that is. But the latter part, depression and stuff like that. I mean, those are, you probably need multiple practitioners to be able to help you through that stuff. And there is that progression, and I think so. I suppose it's like, if you don't get the basic stress stuff checked and sorted out, you're probably gonna end up with something a lot worse. So you probably want to do that sooner rather than later. And that's the purpose of this show, is like, just to almost create that awareness. So there is something like stress, and it is not cool to be stressed out all the time, contrary to popular belief. So you should seek, some, as you said, positive psychology tactics, and go with that. But I do want to close off now. I'll ask Shaz for her closing thoughts. But Stacey, anything on your side that you thought we should have asked you, that we didn't, and that you think will be useful around this topic?
I think what might be useful going forward is, encouraging, individuals to be patient with themselves when they're learning to deal with stress, and be open to this being an evolving process of learning, right? And to try not get frustrated with themselves when they try something and it doesn't work immediately or at all. Be open enough to learn to try something else and be brave enough to do that. Don't be afraid to ask those around you for help, or even going into professional, right? So simple things like, please help me fetch the kids today, I can't. Right? And avoiding less healthy coping strategies like numbing through substance use, or continually scrolling through social media, or even binge watching series for days on end, because this numbing really doesn't help us actually deal with the stress in our life. And then, I think taking a tech break is going to be really important for a lot of us who are constantly exposed to media and blue screen, right? So taking a tech break sometime might be really helpful.
I think it's probably more stressful not of thinking of taking that break for some people. It's like, I'm not going to have electricity, I'm not going to have devices. That's probably stressing them out even more. But I refuse to watch series, too much anyway, because like with series as well, it's easier to watch a movie and then at least it's done in an hour and a half. But sometimes with series, especially if you get stuck in it, it's like you just have to watch the next episode and the next episode. So I like what you said there as well, because I think sometimes that's stressful too. But everything is stressful. It's like, I think for every person, they probably have to just figure that out. I like what you said, and I want to iterate that part, is like, try to stay away from the negative parts. You don't want to deal with, stress by substance abuse and things like that. I think that creates probably its own connotations or negative effects. But Shaz, anything on your side before we close it up?
No, I think we've covered the topic of stress quite nicely today. There's been quite a number of takeaways from that for anybody who is feeling a little bit stressed or think that they're feeling stressed, just those few little things to do. And I do have to agree, mindlessly scrolling through social media is not actually dealing with the stress. All you're doing is putting it into a box to deal with later, and that sometimes doesn't always have the best results. So, take a moment to actually, like Stacy said earlier, just be in the moment and focus on that moment, and then afterwards focus on what the issues are. But if you're stressing about something that hasn't even happened yet, or you're worried about something that hasn't even happened yet, maybe it is a case of, let's go back and see why you're so worried about what might happen and figure out what those root causes are.
No, nicely put. So Stacy, thank you very much for your time. I think we'll link to all of your details, and I think for anyone listening to this, definitely seek out, professionals like Stacy, because that's probably the best investment that anyone could probably do, is that investment in themselves. And I think we're seeing a lot more of that. So I'm really happy with that space, because, it's not, I mean, it's still taboo, but it's not as taboo, I suppose, when someone says, I'm going to go see my psychologist, whereas, 5-10 years ago, I mean, that would have been weird. So I'm happy with that. Thanks very much for doing this. And we really appreciate your time and your knowledge and your wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been a real honor, and hopefully people can benefit from the information shared today.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening. As always, stay tuned and we'll speak to you in the next episode.